I've been a journalist for 31 years. 31 years of covering wars that weren't really wars, peace summits that ended in quiet assassinations, and trade agreements that bankrupted entire planetary systems while the signatories posed for photographs. I've seen things that would make most species wake up screaming at 3 a.m. But I have never, not once, in 3 decades of doing this job, seen an entire room go silent the way it did that afternoon on Velorath 9. Not the polite kind of silence, not the respectful hush you get when a diplomat takes the podium. The other kind. The kind that crawls down your spine. The kind where even the ventilation system seems to hold its breath, where the ambient hum of 1200 beings simply stops. That kind of silence. And it started, and this is the part that still keeps me up at night, it started with a joke. Let me back up. Station Velorath 9 was never supposed to be important. It was a mid-tier waypoint built on the edge of the Korath expanse, one of those transit hubs that exists purely because someone needed a place to refuel their freighter without paying the docking fees at a proper port. The architecture was utilitarian. Everything was the color of old metal and older promises. The concourses smelled like recycled air, and the specific brand of quiet desperation that settles into places where nobody wants to be, but everybody has to be. The Galactic Union had chosen it for the 3rd Interspecies Diplomatic Summit because it was neutral ground, because it was cheap, and because nobody important enough to care about their comfort was supposed to attend. It was a mid-level conference, subsistence trade agreements, migration corridor negotiations, the kind of diplomatic work that happens between the real summits, the unglamorous connective tissue of intergalactic governance. The attending delegation from Earth was small. That was the first thing I noticed when I arrived. Most species sent full entourages. The Vorathi delegation, my own people, technically, though I've spent more time off-world than on, arrived with 46 support staff, 9 diplomatic aides, 4 security officers, and a nutrition specialist because Ambassador Korathvel had a documented sensitivity to certain atmospheric processors common in mid-tier stations. The Kethali arrived with something close to 60 individuals, several of whom appeared to serve no function I could identify beyond looking expensive. The human delegation arrived with 4 people. 4. Ambassador Dara Vasquez, her aide, a young man named Kofi Asant, a translator, even though Vasquez apparently spoke 3 of the attending species' primary languages without assistance. And the 4th member, the one this story is actually about, was their security attachment. His name, according to the badge clipped to his chest, was Sergeant Marcus Webb. He didn't look like much. That's not an insult. I mean it as a genuine observation. He was roughly average height for a human male, which made him shorter than most of the Kethali and considerably shorter than the Vorathi males in attendance. He had dark brown skin, the kind of weathered face that comes from spending years outdoors rather than in administrative offices, and gray at his temples that he hadn't bothered to hide. His uniform was clean but not pristine. Not the polished ceremonial dress you see on diplomatic security attachments who have never worked a real security detail. It was functional. Worn in the right places, the kind of clean that comes from maintenance, not from newness. He walked behind Ambassador Vasquez with the particular quality of stillness that I've only ever seen in certain kinds of people. Not stillness from lack of thought. Stillness from the opposite, from having thought about everything already and decided what mattered. I noticed him the way you notice old furniture in a room that's been renovated around it. He fit, but he fit differently than everything else. I didn't think much of it at first. The first day of the summit was unremarkable. Registration, orientation, the kind of procedural orientation that exists to fill time while delegations assess each other without the pressure of having to say anything meaningful. I worked the concourse, filing preliminary observations for the Vorathi press corps, collecting quotes I'd probably never use, and drinking something the station's catering system described as coffee, but which had the specific bitterness of a translation error. Sergeant Webb stationed himself near the concourse entrance during the social mixer that followed the orientation session. Ambassador Vasquez worked the room with the particular ease of someone who genuinely liked people, a rarer quality in diplomats than the profession would suggest. She spoke to the Cathali delegation at length. She laughed at something the Sulari representative said. She tried a food item offered by the Drethani catering staff, made a face she immediately tried to hide, and then made a point of going back for a second piece because she'd seen the Drethani caterer watching anxiously. Webb watched all of this, not intrusively, not with the paranoid scanning of someone who thought an assassin was about to materialize from the buffet table. He watched the way a person watches something they're responsible for, quietly attentive, present without demanding attention. A few of the other security staff from other delegations attempted to make conversation with him. Standard professional courtesy. Security personnel tend to have their own informal network at these events, sharing logistical information, comparing notes on potential threats, the usual collegial gestures. Webb was polite. He answered their questions, but he didn't volunteer anything. I noticed this because I was bored, and he was one of the more interesting people in the room, which tells you something about the social energy of a mid-tier diplomatic mixer on a transit station. The second day was when things started to shift. The Cathali delegation had brought, in addition to their 60-person entourage, a security detail that was drawing considerable attention. 4 of them were Cathali veterans of the expansion campaigns, recognizable by the ceremonial scarification patterns on their upper carapaces. These were not symbolic soldiers. The Cathali expansion campaigns had been, depending on who you asked, either a necessary territorial stabilization or 40 years of systematic conquest across 11 planetary systems. The veterans carried themselves with the particular confidence of those who have never seriously been asked to justify their violence, because the people who might ask such questions had generally been on the losing side. Their names were long in the Cathali style, so the other security staff had taken to using abbreviated forms: Veth, Karath, Sir, and the largest, whose abbreviated name was simply he. Because when you saw him in person, pronouns seemed insufficient and names seemed aspirational. He was, by any objective measure, enormous. Cathali biology produces warriors through a process of social and physiological selection that I won't pretend to fully understand. But the result, in his case, was something that stood roughly 9 feet tall, carried plating across its upper body that shrugged off small arms fire as a matter of documented fact, and moved with the heavy precision of something that had never needed to move quickly because nothing had ever successfully run from it. I saw Webb clock the moment the Cathali delegation walked in on the second morning. It was a brief thing, a single measured glance, a micro-expression I'd have missed if I hadn't been watching closely, and then Webb's face went back to the quiet neutral it usually wore. The Cathali veterans, for their part, noticed Webb the way you notice furniture, which is to say, barely. The incident happened on the 3rd day, in the main concourse, during what the summit schedule called a networking lunch, which is diplomatic language for an unstructured hour where delegations ate near each other and pretended this constituted relationship building. I was sitting at a table near the eastern wall, eating something I suspected was a grain dish, and making notes on a tablet I no longer have because I apparently left it on Velorath 9, and the station staff never forwarded it, which is fine because what I witnessed that afternoon is not something I would ever forget regardless. The Cathali veterans had claimed a section of the concourse near the central fountain structure. They ate standing up, Cathali dining etiquette, which I'd learned from a briefing document on the shuttle, and they spoke among themselves in their native language. Occasionally, one of them would look out across the concourse with the proprietary assessment of beings who have spent a significant portion of their lives surveying territory they intended to dominate. Webb was stationed approximately 15 meters away, near a structural pillar, in his usual posture of watchful neutrality. At some point, and I watched this happen in real time so I can describe the sequence with some confidence, one of the Cathali veterans, Veth, made a comment to his companions in their own language. I don't speak Cathali. I later had the comment translated by a reliable source with access to the station's ambient audio logs, and I'll share the translation in a moment. But at the time, I only knew that whatever Veth said produced laughter from the other three, not warm laughter. The specific kind that happens when one predator makes an observation about something weaker in its vicinity. Several beings nearby noticed the laughter. It had a quality that crossed language barriers. Then Veth, apparently feeling that a private joke was less satisfying than a public one, crossed the concourse toward Webb. What happened next was witnessed by at minimum 40 beings in the concourse. I was one of them. Veth stopped approximately 2 meters from Webb. This distance is worth noting. Among Cathali, 2 meters is not a conversational distance. It is a distance that says, I have decided to acknowledge you, which should be understood as significant because I don't usually acknowledge things your size. Webb didn't move, didn't change posture. He was looking at Veth the way you look at something you're not alarmed by but are paying careful attention to. Veth spoke in Galactic Common. His common was excellent, with the clipped precision of someone who had learned the language as a strategic tool rather than a communication one. He said, and I am quoting from both my memory and the subsequent audio log translation, the following. You are the human security attachment, yes, for the small delegation. Webb, that's right. Veth appeared to consider this for a moment. Then, with the tone of someone who has just told a joke they are already enjoying. We have heard things about humans, about your species, that you are, here he used a Cathali term that translates roughly as persistently inconvenient, in combat, that you do not know when to stop. A brief pause. He seemed to be waiting for a reaction. Webb gave him nothing except continued, patient attention. So Veth did what beings do when the silence makes them uncomfortable. He pushed further. Tell me, human, for my curiosity only. Your kill count, what is it? How many have you removed from existence? He said it lightly, almost playfully, the universal syntax of a rhetorical question, a question whose real purpose isn't information but demonstration. Look at how small this thing is. Look at me asking it to quantify itself. The beings within hearing range, and there were many, because conversations at diplomatic mixers are the primary entertainment available, went quiet in the specific way that happens when something potentially embarrassing is about to unfold. I had my tablet open. I was taking notes out of reflex. Webb looked at Veth for a moment, just a moment. Then, confirmed or estimated. That stopped Veth. I could see it, the precise moment the question arrived differently than expected. His upper mandibles shifted in the way Cathali faces shift when a calculation resets. What? Webb's voice was entirely calm, not performatively calm, not the calm of someone who knows they're being watched and wants to appear calm, just calm, the way someone is calm when they're having a routine conversation. Do you want confirmed kills, ones I have documentation for, or are you asking for the estimated figure, which includes high-probability kills where the circumstances didn't allow for confirmation? The ambient sound in the concourse changed. I felt it as a physical thing, a shift in the air pressure of attention. Veth processed this. Then more carefully. Give me the confirmed figure. Webb nodded. He appeared to think for a moment, not dramatically, not theatrically, the way a character in a story pauses for effect, but the way someone thinks when they're genuinely doing an arithmetic exercise in their head. Confirmed 212. Silence. Not polite silence, the other kind. Then Veth, and I will give him credit for recovering faster than most would have. And the estimated. Webb, closer to 300. The unconfirmed ones are mostly from 3 deployments where we were moving too fast to do body counts. You learn to estimate by other indicators. He said the last sentence like a man mentioning that he'd learned to read weather by cloud patterns, a skill acquired through practice. Nothing more. The silence deepened. I want to describe what the concourse looked like in that moment, because I've been trying to put it into words for months, and I don't know if I'll ever fully manage it. 40-something beings from 11 different species, many of whom had spent their entire adult lives in political or military contexts. People who had been trained to maintain composure in situations that would break most civilians were standing very still. The Kethali veterans, including he, who I had previously thought of as immovable in the way tectonic geology is immovable, were looking at Webb with an expression that I didn't immediately recognize on their faces. I later asked a xenobiologist who specialized in Kethali physiognomy about that expression. She identified it without hesitation. Recalibration, she called it, the physiological response to encountering a threat you had not classified as a threat. The Vorathi aides near me had gone rigid in a way I recognized from my own species. It's what we do when we don't know which direction danger is coming from, and we're trying not to call attention to ourselves while we figure it out. Ambassador Vasquez across the room had noticed the shift in the concourse's energy. She was watching her security attachment with an expression that was, and I am certain of this, not surprise. She had known. She had known what Marcus Webb was, and she was watching other people figure it out for the first time, and her expression was the expression of someone watching a moment they've lived through before, from the other side. Veth spoke again. His voice was careful now, the lightness entirely gone. 212 confirmed kills. You are, how old? 43, Webb said. And how long have you been in service? 22 years. First 4 years were training and non-combat deployment, so roughly 18 years of active combat rotation. Veth did mathematics I couldn't follow at whatever speed Kethali do mathematics. Then 18 years, and this is a significant number for a human. It's mid-range for someone with my operational history. I had a colleague, same unit, a woman named Sergeant First Class Denisa Ionescu. She confirmed over 400 before she retired. Different deployment patterns. She was in longer engagements. I did more shorter, faster operations. He was explaining it the way a craftsman explains their trade. No pride, no performance, just the technical specificity of someone who knows their field. Shorter, faster operations, Veth repeated slowly. Counterinsurgency mostly, some hostage retrieval, a few interdictions that went longer than planned. A pause. The problem with faster operations is the confirmation issue I mentioned. You move through fast, you don't always get accurate counts. The number could be higher. I don't like to claim what I can't verify. He said this last part. I don't like to claim what I can't verify, with the particular emphasis of someone stating a professional principle, an ethical position about accuracy in their field of work. Their field of work being, to be clear, killing. The Kethali veteran called Kareth spoke for the first time. His comment was less polished than Veth's, rougher, more direct. This is your species' purpose, this killing. Webb seemed to genuinely consider the question. No, he said, I wouldn't say purpose. Most humans don't do this. I was in a specific branch of our military, special operations, small units, high-intensity environments. The majority of my species builds things, grows things, creates things. Some of them do what I did. Most don't. But those who do, Kareth pressed. Those like you, there are many. Webb made the particular human facial gesture. A slight sideways pull of the mouth. That means something between yes and more than you'd probably like to think about. Enough, he said. I should pause here and give some context for why this exchange was having the effect it was having. The Cathali expansion campaigns, the 40 years of territorial conquest I mentioned earlier, had been conducted by an estimated 60,000 combat-specialized Cathali soldiers, supported by auxiliary forces in the hundreds of thousands. 60,000 combat specialists who had collectively, across 4 decades, brought 11 planetary systems under Cathali dominion. The Cathali individual standing roughly 9 feet tall in the middle of this concourse, had a confirmed kill count, a matter of some public record, because Cathali veterans wear it as status, of 108. He was considered, within his culture's military hierarchy, an exceptional soldier. Webb's confirmed number was 212. Webb was, and he had said this himself, mid-range for someone in his operational history, not exceptional, mid-range. And Earth had not participated in any interstellar expansion. Earth's military, which had produced Marcus Webb, existed entirely to fight other humans. The mathematics of this were doing something to the beings in that concourse that I could watch happening in real time. The Sulari representative, an older female who had been sitting at a nearby table and who I had previously assumed was napping, spoke up without opening her eyes. "Sergeant," she said, with the measured enunciation of someone who rarely wastes words, "what is the current estimated size of your species' military?" Webb glanced toward her. Active duty, around 1.3 million roughly. If you include reserve forces and auxiliary services, it's considerably higher. Depends on how you count. 1.3 million. Give or take. She opened her eyes. They were very still. All of them trained as you are trained. No, different specializations. What I did is one subset. Most of our military is logistical, technical support functions. Combat trained but not combat specialized. The proportion who do what I do is a fairly small percentage. But a percentage of 1.3 million. A percentage of 1.3 million. She closed her eyes again. Whether this was contemplation or distress, I genuinely couldn't tell. Veth had not moved. He was still standing 2 meters from Webb, and the joke, the light, easy rhetorical joke he had walked across the concourse to make, was somewhere on the floor between them, and no one was going to pick it up. "Why are you here?" Veth asked, and it was a genuine question now. No theater, no status positioning, just a question from one being trying to understand another. At a trade summit, a mid-level summit. Why does she, a gesture toward Ambassador Vasquez, require someone like you? Webb looked at him for a moment. She doesn't require someone like me, he said. Ambassador Vasquez is more than capable of handling diplomatic security with standard protocols. I'm here because she asked for me specifically. Why? A pause, and then something shifted in Webb's expression. The first true shift I'd seen across 3 days of watching him. Because I'm good at reading a room, he said. And then he did something that I did not expect. He looked directly at me. I don't know why. Maybe I'd been staring too obviously. Maybe he'd cataloged everyone in the concourse, the way he seemed to catalog everything, and my journalist watching had registered as a specific kind of attention worth acknowledging. For exactly 1 second, Sergeant Marcus Webb looked directly at Tureth Nal of the Vorathi Press Corps, sitting at a table against the eastern wall with a grain dish cooling beside him. He didn't smile, he didn't nod, he just looked. And then he looked back at Veth. You had a question, he said. I answered it. Was there something else? There wasn't. Veth returned to his companions. He moved differently than he had when he'd come over. Something in his bearing had adjusted, not dramatically, nothing so obvious as defeat or humility, but something had moved, the way heavy things move when they encounter something immovable from an unexpected direction. The concourse exhaled. People went back to their food, their tablets, their quiet conversations, but the quality of the room had changed. The background noise returned, but it was pitched differently, quieter, more thoughtful. I sat at my table for a long time after that, staring at my cooling grain dish, trying to understand what I had just witnessed. What I'd witnessed, I eventually decided, was the moment a room full of beings who had been carrying assumptions about a species they'd never really had to reckon with suddenly had to reckon with it. They'd asked as a joke. They'd gotten an answer that wasn't one. Later that evening, I found Ambassador Vasquez alone near one of the station's observation windows. The Korath expanse stretched outside, stars scattered across it like something spilled carelessly across black fabric. She was drinking something that smelled like actual Earth coffee, which made me briefly jealous and also curious about what strings she'd pulled to procure it on Velorath 9. I introduced myself. She knew who I was. She had that quality some diplomats develop, of knowing exactly who everyone in a room is before she ever introduces herself. I asked her about the incident. She considered for a moment whether to give me a formal comment. Then she seemed to decide something. "Marcus has been with me for 4 years," she said. "He's the most dangerous person I've ever personally known, and I grew up in a city in a country where that was a high bar to clear. Do you feel safe with him?" She looked at me with the expression of someone reformatting a question in their head. Marcus Webb has never once in 4 years made me feel anything other than completely safe, because of exactly what happened today. He's not dangerous the way they think dangerous means. He's not feral. He's not unpredictable. She paused. He's the most controlled person I know. 200 confirmed kills, and the only time I've ever seen him raise his voice was when a junior aide spilled hot liquid on a station cat, and he wanted to make sure the cat was okay. I thought about this. The number, I said, the way he said it, confirmed or estimated, that was practiced. Was it? He's been asked before. She looked back out the window. He's been asked before. And he always answers the same way. He always tells the truth, she said, in exactly that tone, because the truth is already bigger than anything he'd need to exaggerate. We stood at the window for a while longer. Neither of us had anything to add to that. I filed my preliminary report that night. 14 paragraphs about a diplomatic mixer, and 1 paragraph about the exchange in the concourse. My editor, who is a Vorathi of the older generation, and who has spent 60 years developing the specific kind of editorial skepticism that comes from watching sentient beings consistently disappoint each other, read it, and replied in less than an hour. His message said, "File the whole thing, the exchange, every word, file it immediately." So I did. And then I sat up for a long time, thinking about the mathematics. 1.3 million, the active military of a species that has not yet reached the outer transit corridors. A species whose warriors fight each other, have always fought each other, have refined the technology and practice and psychology of fighting each other across thousands of years and dozens of wars. A species that produces, as a matter of routine, individuals with confirmed kill counts that exceed those of decorated veterans from species twice their size. 1.3 million, give or take. And that's just the active duty count. That's not the reserves. That's not the retired veterans who still remember everything they were trained to do. That's not the civilian population who, in their own history, have demonstrated a willingness to pick up weapons and become soldiers when adequately motivated. I thought about he. 9 feet tall, 108 confirmed kills, considered exceptional by the standards of the species that once conquered 11 planetary systems. I thought about mid-range. I thought about closer to 300. The unconfirmed ones are mostly from deployments where we were moving too fast. I thought about, I don't like to claim what I can't verify. And I thought about something that I didn't write in my initial report, but that I've been carrying with me since. The moment when Sergeant Marcus Webb, mid-range combat veteran of a species no one in that concourse had really thought about before that afternoon, looked directly at me. It wasn't threatening. There was nothing aggressive in it. That was somehow the part that stuck with me most. Because a being that is threatening is something you can prepare for, something you can plan around, something you can name and categorize and file under a known type. What I saw in that single second of eye contact was not a threat. It was a notice. The way a very old and very careful intelligence might briefly acknowledge that you exist. It said without saying anything, I see you, I've seen you. I've been seeing everything in this room since we arrived, and I'm fine, we're all fine, continue. The summit concluded 2 days later. The trade agreements were initialed, the migration corridor frameworks were set for secondary review, and the various delegations filed back to their transports with the usual mixture of guarded optimism and private suspicion that characterizes successful mid-level diplomacy. The Kethali delegation departed before the humans. I was in the concourse when they left. He, the 9-foot Kethali veteran with 108 confirmed kills, passed within 5 meters of Webb, who was standing near the departure corridor with Ambassador Vasquez's carry case at his feet. He stopped. This was significant. He did not stop for things. He was the kind of mass that continued in its direction until it decided otherwise, and the usual experience of those in his path was to remove themselves from it. He stopped, turned his full height toward Webb, looked at him for a long moment. Webb looked back, no more, no less than he looked at anyone. He said something in Kethali, a single phrase. Webb nodded once. He moved on. I grabbed the nearest being who might know Kethali, one of the Drethani catering staff, who had spent years on Kethali-controlled stations and had picked up the language from necessity. What did he say? She listened to my description of the phrase, as I best reproduced it phonetically. She thought about it. Then she said, roughly, you are correctly sized. It is a Kethali phrase. It means they have reassessed your threat category, that you are not what they initially classified you as. What did they initially classify him as? She gave me a look that said she was surprised I'd asked. Small, she said. I want to close this first section of my account with something that happened after I filed my report. I received, through official channels, a communication from the Galactic Union's Department of Species Relations. This is the body responsible for managing diplomatic and cultural contact between member and associate species. They wanted to speak with me about my report, which had circulated more widely than my editor had anticipated. The communication was from a senior advisor named Curator Felizvor, a Sulari of considerable institutional seniority. The same Sulari representative who had been sitting at the table during the exchange, who had asked about the size of Earth's military without opening her eyes. Her message was brief. Correspondent Nall, your account has been reviewed and verified against station audio logs. I would like to speak with you at your earliest convenience about the following question, which I find myself unable to stop asking. If this is what they produce when they fight each other, what would they look like if they were fighting for something else? I read this message 4 times. Then I wrote back, I'll be available whenever you are, Curator. I've been asking myself the same question. End of Part 1. Part 2. What the Galaxy Heard After the Silence. Document File. Galactic Union Diplomatic Archive. extended witness testimony and subsequent proceedings. Filed under Post-Summit Record Incident Classification, Species Relations Tier 1. Primary Correspondent, Turith Nal Vorathi Press Corps. Secondary Testimony Contributors, multiple see footnotes. Compiled 6 weeks following incident Velorath 9. Classification, Open Record. The silence on Velorath 9 lasted about 4 seconds. In galactic terms, 4 seconds is nothing. Stars spend 4 seconds burning through fuel quantities that would power a mid-tier station for a decade. Treaties that took years to negotiate get initialed in 4 seconds. 4 seconds is not a meaningful unit of time by any measurable cosmological standard. But I've spoken to 26 individuals who were in that concourse on the 3rd day of the summit. 26 beings from 9 different species, many of them professional diplomats, military personnel, or journalists, people trained to process rapidly and communicate clearly. And every single one of them, when I asked about that moment, referenced the silence before anything else. Not the number, not the words, the silence that came after them. Because that's the thing about a silence like that. It doesn't live in the moment. It lives in everything that comes after. Curator Felizvor agreed to speak with me 12 days after the summit concluded. We met in her office on the Sulari Primary Hub Station, Nexus Aleph, a place that exists at a thoroughfare of 7 major transit corridors and hums perpetually with the specific energy of beings in organized hurry. Her office was the opposite, quiet, ordered, books, actual physical books, in a range of scripts I could only partially identify, stacked with the organized precision of a mind that had been sorting information for a very long time. She was older than I'd realized at the summit. The Sulari age in a way that's easy to underestimate from the outside. The surface indicators are subtle, but the eyes give it away eventually. Hers had the quality of something that has observed long enough to stop being surprised by most things. Most things. She offered me a drink that turned out to be actual Sulari tea, which is one of the genuinely excellent beverages available in this part of the galaxy, and she sat across from me in a posture that said she had already decided how this conversation was going to go. "Your report," she said, "has generated a significant volume of institutional correspondence. I gathered. Species Relations has received 43 formal inquiries from member and associate species governments. 14 of them are requesting updated briefings on Earth's military capacity. 9 are requesting urgent review of Earth's current diplomatic classification." I thought about this. What is Earth's current diplomatic classification? Associate Observer Status. The same classification we give to species that have achieved interstellar transit capability, but have not yet established meaningful off-world diplomatic presence. And the review requests. Most of them want to know whether that classification is still appropriate. She said the word appropriate with the careful neutrality of someone choosing it specifically, because it doesn't commit to a position. "What do you think?" I asked. She looked at me for a moment. "I think," she said slowly, "that we have made a common error, which is to assess a species' strategic significance primarily through the lens of their behavior toward us. We look at Earth. We see a species that has not expanded beyond its home system, that has sent trade delegations and scientific observers, that has, in the standard diplomatic sense, behaved like a species in its early integration phase. And we did not look carefully enough at what they were doing within their own system, what they were building, what they were practicing." She stood and walked to her window. The transit corridors outside were thick with freighter traffic, the lights of ships moving with the mechanical rhythm of commercial civilization. "There is a biological concept," she said, "in my own species' natural history. An animal extinct now terrestrial called the Vorhareth. It was small, By the standards of the ecosystem it inhabited, it was unremarkable in size. For 6,000 years, Sulari naturalists classified it as low priority, prey species, limited territory. No significant threat to anything. What happened? A researcher finally bothered to study what it ate. She paused. It had been hunting the apex predators of its region for 6 millennia, specifically and exclusively. The naturalists hadn't noticed because they were looking at the predators, not the Vor Harath. It was too small to be worth studying. She turned back from the window. 212 confirmed kills, she said. Mid-range. Those are the words I cannot stop hearing. Mid-range. Not exceptional, not elite. The expected output of a standard combat specialist from a species we have been treating as peripheral. I should tell you about the communication I received from a different source, 3 days before my meeting with curator Fellas Vor. It was from a being called Resh Davarmol. He was a Kethali historian, an unusual occupation, for a species whose relationship with history tends toward the celebratory rather than the analytical. He had heard about the exchange at Velorath 9 through the same channels everything travels through, which is to say rapidly and incompletely. He wanted to know if my account was accurate. I told him it was. He was silent for a long moment on the communication line. Then he said, in Kethali accented common that had the careful quality of someone translating in real time from thoughts that were arriving faster than language could carry them. We have a record. The Kethali, we have extensive records of conquest. 40 years, 11 systems. Our veterans carry their counts as honor. 100, 150. 200 is 200 in a Kethali warrior is a name that enters the canon. A name that gets told at gatherings, that gets carved. He paused. You are telling me this one human, has 212. Confirmed. And he told you there is a colleague with over 400. A retired colleague, yes. Another pause. And this is, he seemed to be working through the words. This is not, he was not in any of our campaigns. He was not fighting us. He was not fighting any species in the Union. He was fighting his own kind. Correct. For how long? How long have humans been doing this? I checked my notes. Recorded warfare in human history goes back approximately 10,000 of their years. Though they've been engaged in organized conflict for considerably longer by most estimates. The silence that followed this was different from the one in the concourse. The concourse silence was collective, the simultaneous inhalation of a room full of beings hitting the same revelation at once. This silence was private. One scholar, alone on the other end of a communication line, doing mathematics that had not been done before. 10,000 years, he said finally, fighting each other, continuously improving their methods, with no external pressure to stop, no species powerful enough to impose peace on them. More or less, yes. And they are still here. Their civilization is intact. Their planet is populated. Remarkably so. That means they got better at surviving their own wars. Better and better, for 10,000 years, at surviving the most dangerous thing in their environment, which was other humans. He went quiet again. The species that survives its own wars for 10,000 years, he said eventually, is not a species you want to make your enemy. He ended the communication shortly after. I think he had things to look up. Webb himself, a Sergeant Marcus Webb, the man at the center of all of this, gave a single formal statement 11 days after the summit, at the request of Earth's diplomatic office, who had been fielding an unusual volume of inquiries from off-world governments. I wasn't present for the statement itself, but I obtained a transcript through the standard press request process, and I've read it more times than I expected to. The statement was given in Earth's primary diplomatic facility on Velorath's transit corridor, before a small gathering of Union officials, who had been urgently curious and diplomatically insufficient in finding ways to express that curiosity through official channels. It was, for a document that has since been referenced in 43 governmental briefings, 6 academic papers, and approximately 1,200 press reports across 7 species media ecosystems, remarkably short. Transcript begins. I've been asked to provide context for remarks I made during the Velorath 9 summit. I'll do that. I want to be clear up front that nothing I said was intended as a statement of aggression or as a diplomatic communication of any kind. Someone asked me a question. I answered it. For those unfamiliar, I served 22 years in Earth's Special Operations Command. I retired 14 months ago at the rank of sergeant. My service record includes 18 years of active combat deployment across multiple conflict zones on Earth's surface. The figure I cited, 212 confirmed kills, is accurate to my documented service record. I want to address what seems to be the main source of interest in my remarks, the question of whether that number is representative of my species. It's not representative of my species the way a surgeon's specific skill set is not representative of most humans. Most of my species does not do what I do. Most of us are builders, teachers, traders, farmers, scientists, caregivers. The fraction of us who serve in combat roles is a small percentage of a large population, but it is not a negligible percentage. I should also address the follow-up question I've seen circulating, which is, why is that number so high by the standards of other species' military personnel? The honest answer is that I don't have a clean answer. Humans have been fighting each other for as long as we've been writing things down. We've had a lot of time to get very good at it. We've never had anyone tell us to stop, no external authority, no species powerful enough to impose peace. So we kept fighting our own wars, and we kept getting better at fighting, and we kept surviving, and the cycle continued. I am one iteration of a very long cycle. I should also say, because I think it's relevant and I don't want to leave it out, that the same species that produced me also produced every doctor who has rebuilt the bodies of the people my profession damaged, every engineer who designed infrastructure in war zones, every parent who raised a child in a conflict region and chose, every single day, to raise that child toward something other than what I became. The same capacity that makes us effective at war also makes us effective at medicine, engineering, art, and the specific human tendency to run toward disaster rather than away from it. I am one thing my species can become. We are also many other things. That is all I have to say on this. Transcript ends. I read that statement for the first time sitting in a small transit lounge on Hub Station Calathmere, waiting for a connecting flight. I read it twice. Then I put down my tablet and looked out the lounge window at the docking arms, where ships in various states of arrival and departure were negotiating the slow choreography of space traffic. The same capacity that makes us effective at war also makes us effective at medicine, engineering, art, and the specific human tendency to run toward disaster rather than away from it. That sentence, I've quoted it in 4 separate articles since, always with full attribution, always with the slightly uncomfortable feeling that I am citing something that is true in a way that my training as a journalist, which prioritizes verifiable, sourced, documentable truth, is not entirely equipped to categorize. It is the kind of true that you recognize in your body before your mind finishes processing it. The formal response from the Galactic Union to the Velorath 9 incident, and it was being called an incident now, in the bureaucratic sense of a thing that requires a formal response, took 6 weeks to materialize and was, by the standards of Union institutional response, astonishingly fast. The response took the form of an emergency review of Earth's diplomatic classification. The review committee included representatives from 9 member species, chaired by Curator Fellas Vor. I know what their initial recommendations were, because I received a copy of the preliminary report through a source I'm not going to identify, because they would lose their position if I did, and they have families. The preliminary report recommended elevating Earth's classification from associate observer to provisional member, which would entitle Earth to a permanent diplomatic seat at Union summits, access to certain restricted transit corridors, and most significantly, formal inclusion in the mutual defense frameworks that bind Union members to collective response in cases of external aggression. The report also recommended, in a separate and notably more diplomatically cautious section, that Union intelligence services undertake a comprehensive assessment of Earth's military capacity that had, the report said, been inadequately addressed in previous evaluation frameworks due to an assumption that intraspecies conflict did not constitute strategically relevant military development. That sentence, intraspecies conflict did not constitute strategically relevant military development, is the bureaucratic version of what the concourse looked like when Webb said confirmed or estimated. It is how an institution says, we were not looking at the right thing, and we didn't know until someone held it up in front of us. I spoke to Webb one more time. Not as a journalist formally, he declined further formal press engagement after the statement, and I respect that, but briefly, at a transit terminal on Velorath 9 itself, about a month after the summit. He was passing through, accompanying Ambassador Vasquez to a secondary consultation. I was there filing follow-up reports on the summit's diplomatic outcomes. I ran into him at the coffee kiosk. He was reading something on a handheld device. He looked up when I sat down nearby. "Correspondent," he said, an acknowledgement, nothing more. "Sergeant," I said. We sat in the comfortable silence of two beings who have nothing particular to say to each other, but no objection to sharing space. He drank his coffee. I drank whatever the kiosk was producing in its coffee approximation. After a few minutes, I said, "The Kethali historian, Resh Davar-Mol, did you see his paper?" "I saw it. He argues that human warfare represents a unique evolutionary pressure that produced military capability beyond what any external threat could have generated. That fighting each other was, paradoxically, what made your species," he uses the word, "formidable." Webb looked at his coffee. "He's not wrong. Does it feel strange, being studied that way?" He thought about this for a moment, genuinely thought, the way he did everything without performance. "It feels strange that people are surprised," he said. "We've been here the whole time. We've been at this the whole time. I don't know what they thought we were doing." He picked up his device again, found his place in whatever he'd been reading. "We've been here the whole time," he said again, more quietly, to himself as much as to me. "We've always been exactly this. I want to tell you about the Kethali veteran the 9-foot soldier with 108 confirmed kills who had looked at Webb and said something that translated as 'you are correctly sized.' He gave an interview 3 weeks after the summit to a Kethali military press outlet. I obtained a translation. Most of the interview was standard military veteran material, reflections on service, thoughts on the summit, observations about the state of interstellar diplomacy from the perspective of someone who had spent his career on a different kind of interstellar frontier. Near the end of the interview, the journalist asked him about the Velorath 9 exchange. He was quiet for a moment before answering. Then he said, and this is the translation I was given, which I've had verified by 2 independent sources. "We went there believing we were the most dangerous thing in the room. This is a belief we carry. It has been accurate in my experience until it was not. The human Webb, he did not threaten us. He did not attempt to demonstrate anything. He answered a question, and the answer was the demonstration because the answer contained the truth of what his kind is." Pause. "I served 40 years. I am not easily impressed. I was impressed. Not by the numbers I understand, numbers I have, numbers of my own. I was impressed by the tone, by the way he said it, like it was nothing unusual, like it was a fact about the weather. Pause. That is the thing that stays with me, not the count, the calm. Because a being that is dangerous and knows it, they want you to know it. They perform it. There is benefit to performance. It changes the behavior of those around you. A being that does not perform it, that just answers your question in the tone of someone describing the contents of a storage unit. That being is not trying to change your behavior. That being does not need to. 6 weeks after the summit, the Galactic Union Species Relations Department held an open briefing on Earth's reclassification. The briefing was supposed to be a routine bureaucratic proceeding. 22 journalists attended, from 11 species. It became the most attended species reclassification proceeding in Union history, according to the records clerk who told me this with an expression that suggested she was still processing it herself. Curator Fellows-Vor chaired. She presented the committee's recommendations. She answered questions for 2 hours. Near the end of the session, a journalist from the Drethani Media Collective, a young one, newer to this than most of us, asked a question that the rest of us had been carefully dancing around. Curator, this reclassification, the defense framework inclusion, does this mean that Earth's military, which has been described as formidable by multiple sources, would now be considered an ally of the Union in cases of external conflict? Curator Fellows-Vor looked at the journalist for a moment with the particular expression of someone watching a person younger than them arrive at a conclusion that took them considerably longer to reach. Yes, she said, that is what it means. The journalist made another note. And how do Union member governments feel about that? Relieved, she said, uniformly. Some of them would not say so publicly because diplomacy is a profession that rewards understatement. But I have spoken with the relevant parties and the sentiment is consistent. Relieved. We have spent, she said carefully, a significant period of time in various proximity to a species we did not fully understand. That species, as it turns out, produces individuals with Sergeant Webb's profile as a matter of routine, in considerable numbers. These individuals have been, up to this point, deployed exclusively against each other, which is simultaneously a tragedy and, from the perspective of other species, an extraordinary piece of luck. She folded her hands on the table. The relief comes from understanding that the appropriate response to this situation is not fear or avoidance. It is relationship. Formal, mutual, documented relationship. Because the other option, treating Earth as peripheral, as an associate observer, as something not quite worth the full attention of Union diplomacy, that option, I am now very clear, is something we cannot afford. She looked around the room. We asked in effect as a joke what they were. Their answer was not a joke. The only appropriate response to a non-joke answer is to take it seriously. I want to end this account with something small. Not geopolitical, not institutional, not the formal machinery of a galaxy recalibrating its understanding of a species it hadn't looked at closely enough. Something small. On my last day on Velorath 9 compiling the final notes for this document, I passed through the concourse where the exchange had happened. The summit was long over. The delegations were gone. The concourse had returned to its function as a transit waypoint, travelers moving through it, stopping briefly, moving on. The fountain structure was running. The ventilation smelled like recycled air. I stopped at the spot where Webb had been standing. There was nothing there, of course. No mark, no plaque, no indicator that anything had happened in that precise patch of floor. Just transit station flooring, worn in the patterns of heavy foot traffic, the particular scuffing that accumulates in high-use public spaces. I stood there for a moment anyway. I thought about a man standing in this spot, relaxed and watchful, holding the weight of 22 years and 212 confirmed moments of the worst that can happen between beings, and carrying it so quietly that the beings around him hadn't known it was there until someone asked. Confirmed or estimated. Not a boast, not a performance, not a threat. Just what kind of accurate do you need? I thought about what Ambassador Vasquez had said. The only time I've ever seen him raise his voice was when a junior aide spilled something on a station cat, and he wanted to make sure the cat was okay. I thought about his statement. The same capacity that makes us effective at war also makes us effective at medicine, engineering, art, and the specific human tendency to run toward disaster rather than away from it. I thought about he, 9 feet of the most decorated Cathali combat veteran of his generation, stopping in a departure corridor to say, "You are correctly sized." I thought about the Vor Harath, Curator Felizvor's small extinct animal that had been hunting apex predators for 6,000 years, while the naturalists studied the predators. And I thought about something I hadn't included in any of my reports, because I wasn't sure it was the kind of thing a journalist includes in a report. When Webb's eyes had met mine that single second in the concourse, while the silence was still settling, I had felt something. Not fear. I want to be precise about this because it would be easy to say fear and feel like I'd adequately described the sensation. Not fear. Recognition. The specific recognition of encountering something that is older and more practiced at survival than you realized, that has been in the room the entire time, that was never threatening you, and that would like, with great calm and considerable patience, to simply get on with the business of existing in the same galaxy. "We've been here the whole time," he had said. "We've always been exactly this." The Galactic Union formally elevated Earth's diplomatic classification 7 weeks after the summit. The ceremony was attended by representatives of 24 member species. Ambassador Dara Vasquez represented Earth. Sergeant Marcus Webb stood 3 steps behind her. The ceremony lasted 40 minutes. There were speeches. There was the formal signing of the provisional membership documents, witnessed by Curator Felizvor and the Union's presiding voice. Webb stood behind Vasquez for the entire 40 minutes, watchful, present, wearing the same clean, functional uniform, the gray at his temples catching the light of an unfamiliar conference room in a way that made him look, for a moment, just a moment, like something that had been standing watch for a very long time. At the reception following the ceremony, the Cathali delegation's lead representative, a younger diplomat, not Veth, not any of the veterans from Velorath, approached Webb with the particular body language of someone who had rehearsed an approach they weren't certain about. He offered a hand, in the human gesture his culture had apparently done enough research to recognize. Webb shook it. The Cathali diplomat said, carefully in common, "My delegation wish me to extend respect. And a question. We are curious whether you might at some future summit be willing to speak to our military advisors about your service." Webb looked at him. "What would you want to know?" "Everything," the Cathali said, honestly. "We have realized we have not been asking the right questions about your species. We would like to start asking the right questions." Webb was quiet for a moment. "Then I'll check with Ambassador Vasquez. If she thinks it's useful, I'll talk to whoever you want me to talk to." "We would be grateful." "I'm not looking for gratitude," Webb said, "not unkindly, just accurately. I'm looking for everyone to get a clear picture, because unclear pictures cause problems, and I've spent 22 years dealing with the problems that unclear pictures cause. I'd rather not spend my retirement doing the same thing." The Cathali diplomat nodded slowly. "Clear pictures," he said. "Clear pictures," Webb agreed. They asked him as a joke. He answered as something else entirely. And the galaxy, which had been carrying its assumptions about a small blue planet at the edge of a mid-tier transit corridor, Assumptions built on incomplete observation, and the quiet human habit of not advertising what they are, had to sit down with those assumptions and look at them honestly for the first time. What it found was not a threat. What it found was something more complicated and more interesting than a threat. What it found was a species that has survived itself, repeatedly, for longer than most civilizations have existed. A species that learned through fire and cost, and the specific brutality of warring with beings who know exactly where you're vulnerable because they are exactly like you, to be extraordinarily good at persisting. And now that species had arrived, quietly, with small delegations and trade agreements and scientific observers, and it had been treated as peripheral. Associate observer. The Vorhareth at the edge of the territory. Until someone asked as a joke, in a concourse that smelled like recycled air, and the answer came back calm and precise and entirely without performance. Confirmed or estimated. And the galaxy went quiet. Not from fear. From the specific, particular silence that arrives when you understand something for the first time that you should have understood much earlier. And somewhere in that silence, if you listened closely, the kind of listening that happens after the breath comes back and the room starts moving again, you could hear, faintly, the sound of a very old and very patient species exhaling. We've been here the whole time. We've always been exactly this. Welcome to the conversation.